Hello and welcome along to the United Boxing Podcast with myself, Darren Rees, here in the UK, my good friend and right-hand man, David Greisman in the States. David, we know you're back at home now. You're not gallivanting around national parks in the United States of America, wrestling with bears and writing fighting columns. How is life back at home in DC?
Darren, it is good and it is busy, and busy in a good way. I know that we both had busy weeks in boxing. How was yours?
Mine was very good indeed, thank you. Yeah, I was lucky enough to do 2 events this week. Friday, I was in Liverpool and called 10 fights with Nathaniel Collins, who's a former British, Commonwealth and European champion in the featherweight division. Very nice man he is too. And we got to see some of the best up-and-coming talent in the UK, really, some really good fighters. And on the Saturday, which we'll speak about a lot more later on, I had genuinely the best seat in the whole of Wembley Arena. I couldn't have been closer. In fact, I'll put it onto my Twitter later on so people can go and check it to see how lucky I was to be so close to the ring with all the fights which we're going to talk about.
I think for both of us, a good week is when we do what we both do best. So for you, that is being ringside, doing the broadcasting. And for me, it's when I do some really good reporting and writing. I was just really happy with the work that I did last week. You know, amid bad news, which was the death of Israil Vazquez, which we did discuss last week, I wrote a really nice tribute to him as part of our midweek staff mailbag on Boxing Scene. On Thursday, I went to the second of 2 press conferences that was held last week for Gervonta Tank Davis versus Lamont Roach. The second one was fittingly in my home of Washington, D.C. I could walk there if it wasn't as cold as it was. Lamont Roach is, of course, from the D.C. area, and Tank is from nearby Baltimore, about an hour north. I was able to interview both of them, and I got a one-on-one interview with Tank, which we talked solely about his desire to step away from the sport, whether that's retirement or break, so that he can focus on his mental health. We'll have that interview for our audience later in this episode, and we'll be discussing that as our big story of the week. And then the other thing I was really proud of was my Fighting Words column that came out Saturday on Boxing Scene, and that was about the latest class of inductees into the International Boxing Hall of Fame, which we will also be discussing later. The one that really raised my eyebrows was the selection of Vinny Pazienza. So I wrote a very strong column about that. Of course, we'll talk about it. But first, let's get into our top topic, and that has to be the fight between Tank Davis and Lamont Roach, namely what came out in the first press conference, the one in New York City, where he was talking about potentially retiring so that he could focus on his mental health, focus on going into therapy, and his thought that he couldn't really work on himself and still summon the anger that he feels that he needs that fuels his skill as a boxer. You know, I've had my own work on mental health over many, many years. And so that was something that really fascinated me. And it also really struck me how vulnerable he was willing to be about that. So let's go to that interview now. It's about 5 minutes. Of course, there's a lot of background noise because we were in public at the press conference event, but I think you and everybody else will enjoy it. What do you think about the journey that you've been on?
Yeah.
What's it like for you?
It'd be hard for me, to say I'll be, like, when I say I'm gonna step back, I'll be thinking, like, damn, I'm fresh at it, like, I mean, not fresh at, like, at boxing, but fresh at, like, retiring. So it'd be like, damn, like, I'm gonna miss it, am I gonna miss it, or it's probably about time for me to, like, slow down my life. Like, I've been living on a fast pace for so long. It's about time for me to, like, slow down and, like, get, like, better myself other than boxing. Like, you feel me? Like, if I can take this break and better myself as a person, as a father, as, you know, as a brother, as everything, fits myself as a whole, I think I should be, I should do that.
People don't realize that your career is not just your pro career, because you've been doing this for your entire life as an amateur. When you think about bettering yourself, and as somebody who went through therapy, I totally get it. How did you come to that realization that you felt like you needed therapy? And what do you want to get out of therapy?
See, at first I thought it was
And we can take it right
a religion.
And that way you can get them away from
you know what I mean? But it just, it's like, I don't know. It just, it's stuff that I catch myself doing, and I would do it, and then I go back and correct myself. You know what I'm saying? I'd be like, if I didn't have this in me, it wouldn't have happened. You know, like I wouldn't have snapped if I wouldn't have had like the main side in me, or I could handle it a better way than the way I went about it. You know what I'm saying? Like, I got kids now, so I don't want to snap on my daughter, not knowing, you know, and just out of anger, I don't want to do that. So I feel though if I can remove everything and work on myself, like going back to school, getting therapy, and you know, moving on, like getting my business stuff in order, I feel though like that would change me as a man. I feel though that would build me more than a boxer. Like that would make me, you know.
Where do you think that anger comes from?
What I've been through, being betrayed, being like, you know, like everything I've been through. But that's me now, just trying to separate myself from it. Like, I'm trying to like move further away from, you know, where I come from.
You mentioned on Tuesday that you don't think you could do therapy and be a pro boxer. I know you get asked this a lot, but why?
Because it's like I still gotta build myself up. I still gotta build myself up and be angry to fight. So I can't just. That's like contradicting myself.
Same way that Tyson had to go off the weed.
You feel me? Like you can't do that, and you can't do two things and try to be like. I feel though that don't even work. That don't work together.
If you don't mind me just saying from my personal experience in therapy, I was so worried about changing from who I was, but you just become a better version of yourself. So, you know, like I hope that you get what you were seeking out of it.
Yeah.
It takes the work, but the fact that you're doing it is a big thing.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely want to see. I feel as though I can get better. Like I could see it, but I can see that like I could become a better person, but it's not there yet. You know, I can see that I can like the person I can become. I can see it, but it just like this hold me up from getting there.
What does that fully realized version of Gervonta Davis look like in your mind?
It's just an amazing person.
Yeah.
Amazing person. I feel very smile like charming. I want to always be charming.
Well, I'm glad that you've talked about it because when I was young, therapy and all that stuff was stigmatized. So the fact that you're talking about it, I think not only you're helping yourself, but maybe you're helping other people who realize that they might need to get some help as well.
Yeah, it's just being true to yourself. Just knowing yourself before everybody and you know, just knowing yourself. I'm true to myself before anything. That's why I can be able to say, I can be able to, you know, show the people I'm broke. I can show the people I got money and things like that. Cause that's who I am who I am. You know what I mean? I'm never gonna change for. You know what I mean?
It was nice to hear him speaking so honestly about that stuff, because normally when you hear Tank in interviews, it's just before a fight on fight week when he's in a pretty violent and aggressive mood and just wants to take somebody's head off. But the fact that not only is he kind of seeking some professional help for what he's obviously recognised is something which he needs to improve on. And I know there's multiple things from what he's saying, and he wants to be the best person he possibly can be. But he's going out there and he's saying it, and he's saying it publicly. You had told me a few weeks ago that Tank Gervonta Davis is one of the biggest stars in America. So he's not just saying that to you for Boxing Scene or this podcast. He's saying it to lots of people. So that message really will go a long way and it will be heard by a lot of people. And there's been quite a few headlines and people have written articles about it and all that other good stuff as well. So yeah, genuinely just a kind of nice thing to hear somebody like him speaking so honestly and openly, especially when he comes from like a pretty, you know, bad neighborhood, like a deprived, you know, background where you've got to be tough to survive. You know, it's like that. Can I ask you this? Did you intend on speaking to him about that, or did it just come out in conversation?
We at Boxing Scene had been talking about how to approach this, how to approach covering both of these events and getting something different or getting something more. Everybody is watching these press conference events. All of the reporters tend to ask the same questions over and over. And I think you and I both know that as a storyteller, there are two tacks to take. You can either tell the story that everyone else is telling and telling it better than they can or anybody else can, or you can tell a different story. Both of those serve the readers. I just was fascinated by it, and it's also interesting to me just following the journey that he's been on. I was first introduced to Tank about 10 years ago. He was 8-0 at the time, and I'd been working with his advisor, a guy named Lauren Chvatkin, who was also working with Seth Mitchell, remember the heavyweight at the time. So there was an event here in DC, and Lauren said, I need you to meet Tank Davis. And we had this conversation. I didn't know anything about him, but this 19-year-old kid, he was talking to me about his boxing background, but his background in general. He does come from a rough neighborhood, and beyond that, came from a very rough place. His mom was a drug addict. He, I believe, was with his grandparents. He went to a new school. He was a short kid. He was more light-skinned than the other kids. He was forced to fight, or he maybe not forced to fight, but he got into a lot of fights, and that's what led to him being put into boxing. But a lot of what he's gone through has stuck with him. That neighborhood that he grew up in, a very violent neighborhood in inner city Baltimore. And he has been putting himself in some bad situations over the years since, even as his career has gone forward. He's got a history of legal troubles. He's got a history of domestic violence. He had an incident in Baltimore, a hit and run incident where he crashed into a car that had a pregnant woman and did a hit and run. So he's made some bad choices, as many of us have over the years. I don't know that he's taken full accountability for all of that, which we would like him to, but I also think it is very good of him to recognize that there are parts of him that he needs to work on. And the thing that really stood out to me was him saying, well, I've got a daughter, he's got a newborn baby boy now as well, and he doesn't want to be falling into the same patterns that he's found himself falling into. And that's not necessarily to say he's getting violent, but just the anger that he feels will bubble up in him. And so he wants to work on that. And so when I see these conspiracy theories online where there are boxing fans who are saying, oh, well, Tank has been ducking all the great competition. He's facing this guy, Lamont Roach, that nobody really wants to see him fight. I'm guessing ticket sales aren't going well, and maybe this is a way for him to drive attention for this fight and his final 3 fights in 2025 so that people go to see him before he's gone. I don't think that that's the case. I don't know whether you have any thoughts on that as well, Darren.
No, I don't think it's as extreme as that. I don't think he is the sort of person who is purposely avoiding people in any way, because he's an animal when he gets into that ring. He really is. I'd say one of the things I was going to say to you though is it a bit of a mistake him coming out and saying that he's got kind of plans of retirement when he's got a fight coming up? Is that showing that he's already got 1 foot out of the door? Because we all know that fighters, when they're at their best and they are, demolition machines like Gervonta Davis can be, they need to have their eyes on the prize 100% and that literally just have the blinkers on and focus on one thing. So the fact that he has opened up and said that he's seeing a future outside of boxing in 2025 or after 2025, it does make me wonder whether his heart's still 100% in it. Which I guess in a way makes me sound like I'm contradicting myself with my initial opening statement. But you get what I'm saying, don't you?
I do, and I think it's a fair question, especially, well, at any time, but especially following the conversation we had last week in the aftermath of Sonny Edwards calling it a night and calling it a career in his fight with Galiafai. Sonny said that he just really didn't have his heart in it anymore and didn't really show up. We don't know until we know. We don't know whether a fighter is going to half-ass it in training camp, whether he's just not really there. We never hear from a fighter while interviewing, oh, well, this has not been a good training camp. It's always, I've had a great training camp. I'm really ready for this. I do think that there is pride in Tank. The fact that he's still fueled by the anger. And the other part of the press conference that really stood out was, although Tank is not unpopular in DC, he's headlined here. He's sold out the Capital One Arena here and did a box office record when he fought Hector Garcia. This is not his town when he's facing Lamont Roach. And so there was some back and forth between Roach's fans and Gervonta Davis. And Tank was saying, well, you all are going to make it worse for Lamont, where I'm going to punish Roach for what you were saying right now. I think that there still is that pride, but Roach, as much as people are discounting him, could show up and be a spoiler, whether that is because of Roach's talent itself or because Tank is somewhat checked out or some combination thereof. I think we will see.
Roach is definitely getting a confidence boost off the back of this, because I know at that press conference which you were at, I watched an interview where there was a bit of a huddle with loads of reporters, and he had basically mentioned saying that he felt that Tank had one foot out the door, and I think he's going to regret saying that, and he was kind of going down that route. So I think that's given him a little bit of a boost. People do tend to step up when the opportunities are as humongous as this, because I'm sure he's going to get some decent money for this fight. But imagine if he could win in whatever fashion, then the opportunities which open up, and financially, the results off the back of that are pretty special. And yeah, look, the good fighters, the really good fighters, are in it because they love the game, and that's how they've got to the level that they have. But that money bit seems to push people that extra few percent. But that fight's in March, isn't it? But can we just have a quick conversation about fighters? It's happened a couple of times recently, and I'd already forgotten about Sonny Edwards, but that's such a good point. So you've got Sonny Edwards who said, look, my heart isn't in the game because of this, that, and the other. We covered it in the other podcast. And then you've got Tank coming out saying that he can see a life without boxing after 2025. Do you think that this could set a bit of a trend and make other people realise that you don't actually have to stay in the game until you're in your late 30s and you're going out on your shield, losing your last couple of fights? Once you've made your money and your heart's not in it, it doesn't matter if you go. Like, could this send the right message to people?
I hope it does. There's a movement outside of boxing where people recognize that mental health is health as well. That's not just about physical health. These boxers, sure, they may balloon up in weight between fights, but when they show up in training camp or when they train, when they're there on fight night, they're at peak physical health. But where is that support structure to take care of their mental health? There have been fighters who struggled during their careers. There have been fighters who struggled after their careers. There have been many people who've gotten into legal issues, who've had various problems. And so why not take care of yourself, whether that is getting out before you physically deteriorate? You look at when Joe Calzaghe or when Lennox Lewis retired, or taking care of your mental health. Tank is, to me, the second biggest star in the United States right now after Canelo Alvarez. He can earn big money in every fight. So the fact that he is willing to step aside and focus on his mental health and give up some paydays, to me, is huge. I don't think that this retirement is permanent. I don't think this is going to be like Andre Ward realizing that he's done everything that he wants to do and getting out and never coming back for some of the fights that people wanted to see. I think that this could be Tank going into therapy, working on himself, and realizing, counter to what he's thinking, that he's not going to be changing himself for the worse. He's going to be changing himself for the better. When I first went into therapy many, many years ago, I was worried that that was going to change who I was fundamentally. And it's not that. It's about making a better version of yourself. It's about learning how to constructively channel or deal with these bad moments. And so if Tank is concerned that, one, his anger that he channels into boxing is also something that is a negative force in his personal life, which it is, that removing that would get rid of his boxing. I don't know about that. I think that he would learn how to deal with that anger in his personal life and still be able to find a way to summon that for his fights. So I think that we will see him back, but I do know that he would also be giving up some paychecks that may actually end up building bigger paychecks. If you think about what the retirements of Sugar Ray Leonard, the retirements, I'm putting in air quotes here, the retirements of Sugar Ray Leonard, Floyd Mayweather Jr., the way that they were able to come back. But all in all, I think that this is a net positive. And to answer your question in a roundabout way, I hope that other people do this. That said, other people aren't earning the money that Tank Davis does and might not be as comfortable stepping away and giving up some of those paydays.
Well, he's 30 years old, is Gervonta Davis, and he's worth an absolute fortune. But I mean, how much is enough money? I guess that's the question, and I guess it's always down to the person, isn't it? And the kind of the people around them. But I think you're right. I don't think it's going to be a permanent retirement. I can imagine he might step away for 2 years, maybe 3 years, come back and have a couple of whopping great fights, fill up some stadiums, and earn even more money than you could ever imagine. And then maybe we'll see a permanent retirement. But while we're on this subject, somebody who's 9 years his senior is UK fighter heavyweight Joe Joyce, who's 39 years old, former Team GB boxer, won silver in Rio 2016, has been involved in some really entertaining, fantastic fights. And then in 2023, he got beaten by Zhilei Zhang, got knocked out in the 6th round. Then he rematched him, and then he got knocked out in the 3rd round. And then he had an awful fight back against Cash Ali. And then he fought Derek Chisora just a couple of months ago at London's O2 Arena. And I was there, lucky enough to be a few feet away and watching him, and he didn't look himself. There used to be a bit of a joke that Joe Joyce blocks punches with his head and he could take the punishment. But after those Zhang fights, he had, it seemed that his punch resistance had kind of deteriorated quite a considerable amount. But I was working for Frank Warren's Queensbury Promotions on Saturday, and I got asked to go and interview Joe Joyce live at ringside. And I was in the moment. We just watched a couple of the heavyweight fights, which we'll speak about in a bit. Joe's a heavyweight, and I said to Joe about those and how exciting it was, and the atmosphere was electric. And I said, I wouldn't be doing my job properly if I didn't ask you this. What's the plans for 2025, and what can you share with us? Now, I know what the plans are for 2025. Joe wasn't going to let on and let the viewers know that. But he said, there's still life for me yet. I've still got it in me. And I said, I'm glad to hear it. You know, you're entertaining, whatever else I said. And then he kind of finished off the sentence. When I was speaking to him, he didn't seem like very, inverted commas, punch drunk. He seemed pretty with it. I didn't really notice anything else. And then when I've watched the clip back, which I've seen on Instagram earlier, it's been viewed 117,000 times. He like the comments are, he sounds shot to bits, he sounds punch drunk, he sounds this, he sounds that. And I instantly felt regret of saying, oh, we love to see it, because I feel like I'm encouraging him to get back into the ring. But at 39 years old, couple of really, really heavy, horrible knockdowns by Zhang. Do you think it's wise for Joe Joyce to fight again, or would you like to see him at his age call it a day?
There are fights that I might salivate at, but I don't think it is healthy for him to go forward. Because when I salivate at those fights, I'm imagining the Joe Joyce that we once knew and not the Joe Joyce that he has since become. It's funny, you talk about him blocking punches with his face. You remember his nickname in the costume that he would come out to. He called himself the Juggernaut, based off of the villain in the Marvel Universe. And that villain's superpower and his armor was the ability to take an inordinate amount of punishment without getting hurt. And that is what Joe Joyce did. That is part of how he beat Daniel Dubois. He took a lot of punishment, and then he came back and just broke Dubois down. He had those wins over Carlos Takam and Joseph Parker. But then against Zhilei Zhang, those 2 knockouts, it just showed that there is nothing on this earth that is impenetrable forever. I mean, I've been to the Grand Canyon this year. Bit by bit, the Colorado River broke down all that rock and made this giant gap in the earth. I'm concerned that Joe Joyce, his pinnacle came so late in his career that he feels the allure of getting more paydays and will continue on, but it will not physically be able to do that for much longer, if not now. And that could further harm his physical health and, going to what we were talking about, his mental health.
I think in a way we're all hypocrites, boxing fans, because it's that there's all the people who have commented on that video and said how punch drunk Joe is and that he's shot to bits and this, that, and the other. I mean, he's always had a certain way of speaking anyway. So that hasn't helped with people's thoughts. But I don't think he was speaking as clearly as he may well have been 5 years ago. But I reckon 99% of the people who made those comments and me saying what I've just said in the way that I feel will still watch Joe Joyce no matter what fight he's in, and still a lot of the time enjoy it, unless it's really kind of watch through your fingers stuff. And we've all watched those kinds of fights before. But yeah, I just think that was an important subject, and it was kind of segued nicely from the Gervonta Davis stuff. And who knows? I mean, let's move on. But it'll be interesting to see who else sticks their hand up and says, "I'm done. I'm moving on."
So the other big news that came out last week was the annual announcement of who's going to be in the newest class of the International Boxing Hall of Fame. That announcement was made early December. They'll be inducted in early June in Canastota, New York. It's upstate New York. The lead inductee, of course, is Manny Pacquiao. That was a given no matter what. But the other two modern boxers selected were Michael Nunn and Vinny Pazienza. There were also three modern women boxers, Jessica Chavez, Anne Sophie Mathis, and Mary Jo Sanders, as well as some various other people like referee Kenny Bayless, some journalists. I forgot to say, referee Harry Gibbs of the UK was among the honorees. But the big headline, even more so than Manny Pacquiao being selected, was the debate or absolute astonishment that Vinny Pazienza was voted in. I don't know how closely you followed Pazienza's career. He was really at his peak when you and I were both very young. But how did you take the news that Pazienza was among these inductees?
I've got to be truthful. I don't actually know a lot about him. But I guess the bit which intrigues me more than anything is how it all works. So how does somebody end up being inducted into the Hall of Fame? Like, how do they get shortlisted? Who gets the final say? I mean, like, how does all that stuff work?
So there are answers to some of those questions and no answers from me, at least, for the others. And that is part of the problem, is the lack of transparency. So the names that are put onto the ballot, they have to be retired. I think it used to be a minimum of 5 years since they retired. It's now a minimum of 3 years since they retired. Those names are selected by a committee run by the Boxing Hall of Fame. There are people who are not on the ballot that a lot of boxing writers think should be on the ballot. And there are people who probably shouldn't be on the ballot who are still taking up space on there. Then, for each category, there's a certain number of votes. There's a minimum number of inductees every year. And so in the modern category, there are at least 3 inductees for the male boxers every year. That is contrary to the way that baseball, the American pastime, the way that that's done. Voters for the Baseball Hall of Fame, there have to be at least 75% of voters picking somebody for them to be able to get in. So it sets this minimum threshold. There's no minimum threshold in boxing. So what could happen is the voters could sit down. They have 5 fighters that they could pick. They could pick Manny Pacquiao and split their 4 votes between the other guys. It's wholly possible, me not knowing the exact number, that Pazienza got in with fewer people voting for him than voted for other candidates. It could have been that, like, he had 20 or 25% of the vote, but he still had a plurality as compared to the many other names on the ballot. As for your question for who does the voting, if you are a full member of the Boxing Writers Association of America, you have a vote. And there's a handful of other voters. We don't know how many. We don't know whom, but listed as historians and observers who also have a vote. I would love to see a list of who the voters are, and I would love to see vote totals so that we know how many people got these votes every year. I'd also love to see that minimum threshold. But the big issue is that I imagine most of these voters are from the United States. They might not be making the best choices. They might be voting off of the idea of, oh, well, the word fame is in this, as opposed to just voting for the best of the best, the greatest of the greatest, the way that halls of fame are supposed to be for the top inductees, not realizing that there are parts of the museum that can recognize these other guys. And they're giving that kind of love to a Vinny Pazienza who twice held a world title, never made a single successful defense of his world titles, never beat any other Hall of Famers in their prime. He did have 2 wins over a very old Roberto Duran. Didn't have a good record against other guys, but because he was famous, because they enjoyed watching him, they give him more of a benefit of the doubt than they might give somebody like Nigel Benn, who had a much better record, is on the ballot, and was also incredibly popular, but happens to be from the UK.
So it sounds like it's a very similar setup to how some of the governing bodies work then. Because I don't know if you use this saying in the US, but we've got a saying in the UK where we call stuff the old boys club, where there's like a selection of old timers who rule the roost and are the decision makers and kind of do what they want because they've been there and they've been around for a long time. So is the International Boxing Hall of Fame in a way similar to a WBC or an IBF or one of those? What's your opinion?
I wouldn't go that far.
Okay. Whoa, blimey. Okay.
I think that the International Boxing Hall of Fame is very well intentioned, but it seems as if they are resistant to change. And it's not that this kind of thing happens often, but there are inductees who very much raise their eyebrows. There's some people who are not offended by Arturo Gatti being in. I know that I am a big fan of Arturo Gatti. He's the reason that I got as into boxing again. And I have so many fond memories of watching him. I loved watching him fight. I don't think that he should be in the Hall of Fame. So guys like him or Ingemar Johansson or now Vinny Pazienza, there seems to be different standards for certain boxers in the United States than there are for other guys on the ballot. I'm amazed that Pazienza got in, but Israel Vasquez did not, that Antonio Tarver did not. I know that there was a concerted PR campaign. I think that there's a system that needs to be changed, and that in lieu of those changes, it's vulnerable to having some moments that raise the eyebrows and, in the eyes of some, not me, will tarnish the integrity of that institution.
This is interesting stuff, and this is just me thinking out loud and asking you questions which I genuinely want to know the answers to, and I know that people in Britain will want to know the answers to as well. The International Boxing Hall of Fame is, I wouldn't say it's of massive interest in the UK. People are obviously aware of it. It sounds like, and this isn't just from my conversations with you, but with others in the States, it sounds like it's a bit of a bigger deal in the US, and it's probably cared about a little bit more in the US than it is in the UK. And I'm not for one moment saying people don't care about it in the UK, and people do use it a lot. So like at the boxing on Saturday, Frank Warren got into the ring to present an award to a member of the Queensbury team who'd worked with him for 40 years. And he was introduced as Frank Warren, International Boxing Hall of Fame promoter. So, it's mentioned and it's spoken about in articles and so on. But yeah, I don't think it is as bigger of a topic this side of the pond as it is that side of the pond. But you mentioned earlier on about what's the Writers Association? You said if you're a full member, which one is it?
The Boxing Writers Association of America.
So you're not? Are you a member of that?
I am.
So you don't get to vote though.
No, I do get the
Oh,
vote.
you
So
do?
I voted, so I voted for Pacquiao and Nunn and Tarver and Israel Vasquez and a fighter named Santos Alicia. Those were my 5 votes this year.
So okay, I'm with you. So you get to vote. So you do have an impact on that. But your grumble is you don't get to see where the votes came from for other people who were inducted in.
We don't know who all the voters are. We know that all the full members in the BWAA, like me, get votes, but we don't know who the other voters are, whether they might have conflicts of interest. And then beyond that, we don't know what the vote totals are that come in. I know that to our UK listeners, this might not seem like a big deal or as big a deal, but being in the Boxing Hall of Fame does matter to the inductees. You know, even the people who aren't in the Boxing Hall of Fame, when fighters or other people in the industry come to the induction weekend, which I think every boxing fan should go to every year, in the US at least, it's not like being in the UK where you could go to a pub and find another boxing fan. When you go to Canastota, you're in this small town, you have immediate access to all these fighters. You can walk up to pretty much everybody and have a conversation. And the fighters and other people in the industry, they love that. It's just this ability to be around people who love what you love, and for the fighters to be able to be around these fans. And so when you make it into the Boxing Hall of Fame, it is a big deal. There's some emotion in it. And even if you are not from the United States, we've seen Japanese fighters, we've seen Ricky Hatton come in. They very much enjoy the honor.
So another question for you, and you've got me intrigued now. So with the voting and you getting your vote, and from what you were saying earlier on, does your vote count as much as other people's votes? Like, is that how it works, or is there people who have got a higher status? And I don't know. Does it work in the same way that politics might work?
We have the same vote, so far as I know. I don't think that there's any like being a super shareholder for a company where you've got more weight than other people do. But just as an example, say there were 70 voters overall, and 70 voted for Manny Pacquiao, but then there's so many other names on the ballot, and there was a long-time concerted PR campaign to support Pazienza. Wholly possible that he got in with 25 votes out of some of these people, and that some of these people might not be journalists. They might be people who were friends with Pazienza. I want to know who these people are, and I would want this. I've been calling for these kinds of reforms for years, long before this kind of thing happened, just because I believe in the integrity of institutions. I don't want to say that the IBHOF doesn't have integrity, but this kind of thing hurts it. It's not good news. This, in my eyes, and this is not about Pazienza, it's about the Boxing Hall of Fame, but I feel bad saying this, but Pazienza could go down as being one of, if not the worst inductee in the modern category of the Boxing Hall of Fame. And I am emphasizing the names of the categories because somebody like Sylvester Stallone, Rocky, he's in as an observer. So somebody like a journalist or an artist or a filmmaker, there are different categories where people are being recognized. That's different. And to me, that doesn't water down the accomplishments of all these other people. And the one final thought, when I just said watered down, I don't think that the bar should be lowered when somebody like a Pazienza gets in. I don't think that every other fighter who earned 2 world titles and never defended them should be in. Just because we made one mistake or 2 or 3 or 4 doesn't mean that we should keep on perpetuating that mistake in perpetuity. Sounding like more of an owl there with my alliteration.
No, that's genuinely interested me, and I've learned a lot from that. And I get what you're saying now. I understand it a lot more. So yeah, it's about the right people being in the International Boxing Hall of Fame, so it doesn't become a diluted thing and loses respect.
That's exactly it.
There we go. Boom.
Well, we talked about a lot already with Gervonta Davis, Joe Joyce, and the International Boxing Hall of Fame, but there's a ton of other news going on in boxing. One is a bit disappointing, but not surprising, and that is that Israil Madrimov, the junior middleweight contender, is out of the Serhii Bohachuk fight, which was going to be on December 21st on the undercard of the Alexander Usyk-Tyson Fury rematch. Now, Madrimov, his team is citing a case of bronchitis, which may or may not be true, but there are cynics, there are skeptics who going off the fact that Madrimov had already signed for this December 21st fight and then signed for a February 22nd fight, some 63 days later against Virgil Ortiz, and just were of the belief that there was no way that he was going to be able to do both of these, even if he wasn't going to be facing somebody as punishing as Bohachuk. How disappointed are you with that news?
Yeah, it's disappointing because we looked at that card and we looked at that fight, and it looked interesting. It looked intriguing, and the replacement Israil Davis, who we obviously saw on which undercard did we see him on? We saw him on the Wembley version of Riyadh season, didn't we?
Yes, he fought and lost to Josh Kelly via majority decision just this September.
It just seems like a bit of a mismatch. That it doesn't seem like it's gonna be a well matched contest in any way, because it was a majority decision. I remember because there was obviously there was one judge that scored it 114, and there was a bit of a what moment, really, because Josh Kelly just kind of boxed his socks off there, and he was fantastic. Am I being a bit harsh?
I don't think you're being a bit harsh, but I also feel like they're doing right by Serhii Bohachuk, who just lost this opponent through no fault of his own and would be losing out on a payday and a spotlight. It's funny. It's been both a good and a rough year for Bohachuk, where he was supposed to be facing Sebastian Fundora on the undercard of that Tim Tszyu Keith Thurman fight in March. When Thurman got injured, Fundora stepped in and Bohachuk fought Mendoza on the undercard instead. He had that fight against Virgil Ortiz in August, lost a close decision. And so the fact that he was still getting on this card and against a very good opponent in Madrimov was going to be good for him. My hope is that if he comes through this fight with Davis, which we expect him to do, that he will land another big fight in this very talented 154-pound weight class. So sad for him. It's not going to be as strong a card, but I'm glad that he's still got the opportunity. In other news, it looks like Naoya Inoue might have a different opponent in April than what we were originally expecting. I was expecting that he was going to be facing Murajan Akhmadaliev, who's going to be fighting this weekend, but instead it could be another strong contender at 122, but not one that people might have heard as much about, a guy named Alan David Picasso. We'll get more into that if and when that news becomes official. I do want to say, though, that it's kind of funny to me that boxing might be the only sport that has a Picasso and two guys that have been Van Gogh'd. Antonio Margarito, potentially Lucian Ear, and Evander Holyfield, the same thing. There was some other weird news this week. Roy Jones, who is a promoter, obviously a former fighter, he's going to be filling multiple roles on the same card. In addition to promoting the show, he's going to be training several fighters and doing commentary during the show. Somebody said that the only thing that's missing will be if he plays a professional basketball game earlier in the day and then wraps everybody else to the ring.
He could do that as well, couldn't he? He could just do multiple ring walks if can't be stopped. He's some character, isn't he, Jones Jr.? He is bonkers.
You know, I used to work in music stores. Way back when, and we definitely played "Y'all Must Have Forgot" over and over again back when he had that album.
I would do exactly the same.
You know, we've talked so much about other news in boxing, but we haven't talked yet about some of the big results that happened this past weekend, including the show that you were ringside for. So before we get into some of the stuff that took place in the United States and in Puerto Rico, let's talk about that fight between Denzel Bentley and Brad Pauls, as well as the Noakes brothers fighting on the undercard, and Lawrence Okolie. What were the standout performances to you?
It was a solid card. Very, very solid. Big shout out to Pierce O'Leary, first of all, who wasn't on the televised card on the broadcast. He was on the prelims. So I was the person who was in charge of leading the commentary on that side of it. He is some talent, that Pierce O'Leary. Honestly, he's going to be a very, very special fighter. So I think he's been my fighter of the week in the past. I can't quite remember, but go back and have a look at his knockout. It was devastating, proper faceplant business. It was a real bad one. But let's go straight to the main event. So yeah, Brad Pauls versus Denzel Bentley, the European middleweight title fight. And Paul's started well. It was very even to start with. Paul's, for me, was kind of edging round 1, edging round 3. Bentley had this saying at the end of the fight that he was going to conflict death by 1,000 jabs. Of course, he didn't actually want to kill Brad Pauls. It was just a saying. But it was his jab which worked so nicely for him throughout the fight and broke up his attacks, ruined his flurries of punches. Every time that Pauls tried to make an entrance, Bentley would just basically jab his head off, doubles, trebles, quadruples, and that really worked well for him. And I think that I scored. I know what I did. I scored it 1-1-5, 1-1-2 to Bentley in the end, and it was a very good performance. And he moves on to potentially a world title shot. That's what Frank Warren had promised the winner of it. And I wouldn't mind seeing it in a rematch either. Not immediately, maybe somewhere down the line. Paul's is always an entertaining fight, but I thought Bentley was exceptional. Must have been something wrong with Brad Paul's eye as well, though, because he was really kind of like blinking a lot, and he kept sort of like dabbing his eyes. So I don't know if there was something wrong with his eye, but nothing's come out off the back of that. Did you get to see it?
I got to watch the main event. It'll be interesting to see how competitive Bentley will be if and when he gets that rematch with Janibek Alimkhanuly. He lost a clear decision to Alimkhanuly when they first fought. Do you think that Bentley has improved enough to give Alimkhanuly trouble?
No, I don't think so. I think he's improved in boxing. His levels, and I think that Bentley's level is probably that European level now. And I think he could probably have some really, really great fights in between British and European level. But when he's stepped up to world level before, he hasn't quite been able to compete. Hopefully he'll prove me wrong, of course, because we always want a British world champion over this side of the pond. But whether he'll be able to get there and do it, I don't think so. No, I don't know. I don't think he will. But on the undercard, there was David Adelaide versus Solomon Dakers, which lasted something like 1 minute and 20 seconds. He landed an almighty left hook on the temple of Solomon Dakers, and the lights, it was literally like someone just flicked the light switch, and he just kind of, and these are big guys, they're heavyweights, and Dakers just towered, just fell like a tower which just had the dynamite button press, and then tried to get to his feet far too quickly, and the referee did the right thing and called that off. And then there was the return of Lawrence Okolie, but Lawrence Okolie's, it was his first fight at heavyweight. He didn't look like he was in fantastic condition. I think he'd very much been enjoying eating what he wanted, not having to boil down to try and reach 200 pounds of being the cruiserweight division. But he was devastating. And the guy he was fighting was an okay operator. He wasn't amazing. Did you see that knockout?
I did, and I'm left with more questions than answers, but it is a fine entry into the heavyweight division. People who look at BoxRec will see that Okolie was at 223 for his last fight in May against Lucas Brzezinski, but that was at Bridgerweight, the division that only the WBA and WBC recognize. Okolie had a world title at cruiserweight. He had a world title at Bridgerweight. Do you think that this 260-pound version of Lawrence Okolie, or even one that gets in a little better shape, can be competitive against these other heavyweights? He is 6'5" and he is 31.
And he's also well schooled. There was a reason he was on Team GB, and there was a reason he went to the Rio Olympics, because he can box. But what has been his downfall over the years is he's been a terrible boxer to watch stylistically. And the amount of times that he's had fights where he's had points taken away over and over again for holding. And that, I remember when Matchroom first signed with DAZN, and I think it was the Anthony Joshua versus, I want to say, Povetkin fight at Wembley Stadium. And the co-main event was Lawrence Okolie versus Matty Askins. And it is still to date the worst fight I've ever seen in my life. It was terrible. But what I will say is Lawrence Okolie looked like he was doing everything he possibly could on Saturday not to hold. Because what he used to do is throw a right hand, and if you miss, he'd just grab hold of you. But what Joe Gallagher seems to be doing he's beaten that out of him. So he was, when his opponent, Mohammed Hussein, I think his name was trying to get hold of him, he was properly pushing him off, really trying to get rid of him. He was trying to genuinely box and get behind his jab. So if he continues like that, then he could be devastating in the heavyweight division.
Yeah, and there are just so many heavyweights in the UK, so many heavyweights in Frank Warren's stable. It'll be, I know that Okolie is with Hearn, though. Is that correct?
Lawrence Okolie is just signed a deal with Queensbury.
So he is with Frank Warren. So there will be many more opportunities for him. So long as we don't get another version of John Ruiz, who you may or may not remember 20 plus years ago, that was the jab and grab, who still somehow got his way to a heavyweight title and 3 fights with Evander Holyfield. I don't know that anybody on earth, aside from people in the Ruiz family and circles, ever uttered the sentence, let's go back and watch another John Ruiz fight again.
Yeah, no, that's it. So Lawrence Okolie at the moment is in that boat. He's in that boat. I don't think there's anyone in the world who watched Lawrence Okolie versus Matty Askins who has gone back and watched it a second time and thought, do you know what? There's no boxing on this weekend. I'm going to go to the shop. I'm going to buy some beers and some popcorn, and I'm going to rewatch that fight. Now, I've done that with fights in the past, but never have I done that with a Lawrence Okolie fight. And I remember I was working for BBC Radio 5 Live on the night that Okolie lost his cruiserweight world title to Bilham Smith. It was at the Bournemouth football ground. And I wasn't doing commentary that night because the BBC were doing commentary for Lee Wood versus Maurizio Lara. And I was doing updates from ringside. So if anything significant happened, they would come to me and I would give an update on what had just happened. So knockdowns, whatever else. And I kept going back to him, and I'm calling through to the studio saying, Lawrence Okolie's had another point taken away. So they go, oh, what's happening in Bournemouth? Darren Rees is there. Lawrence Okolie's been given had another point taken away for holding. And it became a bit silly because, like, on the third time that it happened, I rung through to the producer and said, Lawrence Okolie's had another point taken away. And they were like, we're not coming to you, Darren. Like, it's already happened twice. Just let us know if there's a knockdown or a knockout. And in the end, I had to do just a summary at the end to say Lawrence Okolie, I think, had 3 points taken away for holding. So, like, I don't think I'm being harsh or we're being harsh when we say that about Lawrence Okolie. He really does need to and did need to clean up his style. So, an interesting few years ahead for him if he can continue doing what he did on Saturday. And one last word on this is, I genuinely couldn't have been any closer. The only person closer than me was the judge. That's how fortunate I was on Saturday because I was on the table where the commentary was happening before. And when he hit that German opponent with that right hand, the crack that you heard, it was like his skull was being caved in. And I don't know how well you can see this on the clip, but Okolie's leg, not Okolie, the German opponent's leg kind of folds over, and it looked like his leg had snapped as he went down because he went over on it, and it was nasty, and he went down with a bang. He got back up, his leg didn't look great, and then he started complaining like mad that the referee had stopped it, but 100% it was the right decision.
That sounds both amazing and frightening from your perspective at the same time. So if nobody's going to go back and watch Okolie versus Askin on a slow weekend for boxing, should they go back and watch either of the Noakes brothers fights from that undercard?
Yeah, Sean Noakes did a really good job on Matthew Rennie. Rennie performed very well in the first 2 or 3 rounds. Then he started to hold his feet. And as soon as he started to hold his feet, Sean Noakes, this is the welterweight, just started putting it on him and started going through the gears. And Rennie was probably lucky that he didn't get pulled out of that fight. Sam Noakes, I'll tell you about in a little bit because he's my fighter of the week.
There is one fight that maybe not everybody saw this past weekend, but they should definitely pull up on YouTube, and that was the 2-round war in Ireland between Tyrone McKenna and Dylan Moran. I don't know if you've had a chance to see it yet.
I've just seen some of the highlights. It looks sensational.
Let's talk about some of the other action that took place over this weekend. And in the main event in Puerto Rico, Richardson Hitchins won the IBF junior welterweight world title with a victory over Liam Paro. That is a big win for Hitchins, and we'll get into that a little bit more when I talk about my fighter of the week. It also potentially throws into flux a fight that we were expecting to see next for Paro, which is a fight with his fellow Australian, George Kambosos, although I think that is still possible, even if there is less luster on that than would have been the case. And then there was a 2-fight doubleheader, both with rematches on ESPN. In the main event, we saw Espinoza, that's Rafael Espinoza, win yet again against Robeisy Ramirez. And it was a strange and controversial win. It seemed like Ramirez just quit at the beginning of the 6th round, and he cited elbows. He said that he got elbowed in the face. I've gone back through replays, and it's still hard for me to tell whether these were elbows or punches. No matter what, Ramirez said that he was seeing double vision, and according to Top Ranks PR people, he suffered a fractured orbital bone. So no matter the cause of it, I think that it was right for Ramirez to take the L the way that he did. He is taking a lot of heat. I think part of it is that he was a two-time gold medalist in the Olympics and hasn't quite lived up to all the expectations in the pros. He suffered that loss in his pro debut. He's now lost 2 straight. He no longer has his world title at 126, but it's a little weird to me that we are maligning Ramirez for calling it a night when he suffered a bad injury, the same week that we are recalling the great career that Israel Vasquez had, given that Vasquez himself called it a night from an injury in that first fight with Rafa Marquez.
Can I just say, David, I think it's remarkable how you keep up with all of the boxing, because you've got a day job as well, and you write all your stuff for Boxing Scene, and you're at these press conferences, and you seem to be on top of every single fight. And the amount of boxing these days is ridiculous.
There is a lot. There are people who watch a lot more than I do, so I can't take all of the credit. But the one thing that our listeners don't know is I also keep myself looking good. So there is that with my time as well.
Hey.
So on the undercard, there was also a rematch. I said on the undercard, Espinoza versus Ramirez was on the undercard. The main event was Emanuel Navarrete winning a rematch with Oscar Valdez. It was a clear but entertaining win for Navarrete the first time. This time it was very much the Emanuel Navarrete show. He stopped Valdez. Valdez just doesn't have the power to beat a guy like that. This might be it for Valdez at the top tier. What a fun career that he did have. It'll be interesting to see what happens next for Navarrete, whether he gets that unification fight with Oshaki Foster. And then other than that, the other big result this past weekend was Kubrat Pulev capturing the regular WBA heavyweight title from Manuel or Mahmoud Char.
Can I just
say,
I completely forgot this was even happening. It was only when you've just said that I remembered that it happened. I don't even know what happened. What happened?
It was a decision, but I don't know how much of that is because nobody cares about these fighters. Nobody cares about the regular WBA heavyweight title when we've got guys like Alexander Usyk and Tyson Fury fighting, or if it's just the fact there were so many boxing cards to watch last weekend. There's even more this coming weekend. I think there were 13 fight cards that I wrote about in my TV picks piece. I'll just wrap with this, which is that Kubrat Pulev at the age of 40 is now in line, ostensibly, for a shot at the winner of Usyk Fury 2. It's possible that the winner of that fight will vacate the belt the same way that they did because they were not going to face Daniel Dubois given the rematch clause. Or it could be that the WBA will keep 2 titles around and potentially order Kubrat Pulev to face Martin Okolie.
Kubrat Pulev versus Martin Okolie. Well, yeah, I don't even know what to say to that. They're just, yeah. But like, you know, we started the show talking about fighters going when maybe they're a bit younger, and the time is now to move on. Whenever that now is for whatever fighter, the likes of Pulev should have gone a long time ago.
Yeah, indeed. Well, let's move on then and talk about some of the upcoming fights. And there is a big fight card taking place in Liverpool with 2 women's title fights. We've got Natasha Jonas versus Ivana Habazin and Lauren Price versus Bexy Mateus. What do you think of that show?
Honestly, I don't think it's amazing. It's not the sort of show when I saw the poster for it where I thought, wow, that's incredible. I might actually go and drive back up to the north of England and go and watch that. I just think that Natasha Jonas will win. I think that Lauren Price will win. And then I think after that, they'll announce Natasha Jonas versus Lauren Price, which is a fight which people want to watch. And we always talk about the passing of the torch. Natasha Jonas had a brilliant career. She's had a roller coaster of a career. I hope she's earned loads of money. Fantastic role model to not just girls on the way up, but boys on the way up in boxing clubs in Liverpool and around the country. However, there is a great fight on that card, and that is Lee Cutler versus Stephen McKenna. That will be an out-and-out war. That has got the ingredients to be a British Boxing Board of Control Fight of the Year contender without any doubt whatsoever. So I am excited about that one.
So in other action coming up this week, there is an Irish fighter, Conor Wallace, light heavyweight, who's headlining in Australia. There is a appearance by super middleweight Jaime Munguia facing Bruno Sarase. I might be pronouncing his name wrong. That'll be in Tijuana. It's a good fight between welterweight prospect Raul Curiel and twice beaten welterweight Alexis Roca. Given the state of that division, the winner could end up somehow getting a title shot in 2025. And then there's the fight in Gibraltar, the heavyweight fight between Dillian White and Ebenezer Tete. But beyond that, the other fight that you and I will both be keeping an eye on, both for the main event and for the undercard, that's the fight between Murajan Akhmadaliev is going to be facing a fighter, Espinoza Franco, on the in Monte Carlo. And the winner of that could get a shot at Naoya Inoue in 2025. And on the undercard, it's a pretty good fight with Chev Clark.
Yeah, Chev Clark is... I don't think he's getting the credit or the respect which he deserves, really. Again, he's a former Team GB boxer, a well-schooled fighter. But looking at his records, just looking at his box rec now, he has only had 10 fights. He's only been a pro since 2022. And the other thing, which I think people need to kind of take note of as well, when you look at other people's records and their journeys and the way that they've moved forward, is Chev Clark has only fought 2 people with what we'd call losing records. Everyone else has had a lot more wins than they've had draws or defeats. And in most cases, a lot of fighters will go 10, 11, 12 and 0, just fighting journeyman and away corner fighters. And I go back to that famous quote which Lou DiBella once said to me, Darren, I could get a jam sandwich to 14 and 0. Chev Clark isn't fighting those people. He's not fighting people who are just there to survive. And on Saturday, he fights for the European title. And I genuinely think he could be a proper contender in that cruiserweight division. Like, he has got something about him where he's not just a great, well-schooled fighter. He's not just a knockout artist, and he has knocked out 7 or 8 people out of the 10 opponents which he's faced. But there's something different about him. And you'll know what I mean by this. You must have met thousands of boxers over the years. I've probably watched over 1,000 fights this year alone from just being a spectator and working. And you meet all these different people. There's something about Chev Clark which stands out. He is different to other people. So I think people, if you're not aware of him and you haven't watched him fight before, just keep a close eye on him and watch this card for the sake of him, because the kid's got talent and he's got something else in between his ears.
Definitely one to watch. I'm glad that he's staying active. This will be his 4th fight of 2024. Be interesting to see, should he get past this opponent on Saturday, what he does in 2025. Let's move on to our fighters of the week. Darren, I think you've mentioned already that you want to spotlight somebody from the show that you were at. Who is your fighter of the week?
Yeah, I said it earlier on. So Sam Noakes is my fighter of the week who, basically demolished Ryan Walsh on the weekend. Ryan Walsh, I probably gave him a bit too much of a chance last week when we were previewing this fight. and you probably do this as well, is when fighters have been around for a long time, it's easier to remember them at their peak. And then you get to see them in the flesh again, and then you quickly realise that they're not the fighters which they were. I know, because I've seen Sam Noakes on numerous occasions. I've worked with him ringside. I know, watching him on Saturday night, that he didn't even go through the gears. He probably got up into second or third gear, and there was easily another 3 or 4 gears for him to go through. For anyone who watched it, if you watched it on the TV, I know lots of people across X and other social media platforms were basically saying Walsh's team have got to pull him out. Noakes is a vicious little man, and the crunch on the shots, the right uppercut, honestly, just a couple of the right hands lifted Walsh off of the floor, properly lifted him off the floor. Devastating. The way he puts his punches together, his feet are fantastic. Got such a level head on his shoulders. I think he'll be world champion in 12 months. He is a very special talent.
I'm glad that you brought that up, because I very much want to see him get that title shot. Now, the 4 title holders at lightweight are Gervonta Davis. They are Vasily Lomachenko, who may be retiring. There's Shakur Stevenson, and there's Denis Berinchyk. I think the fight for Noakes is Berinchyk. It's just a question of whether Keyshawn Davis gets there first. I don't know who's more deserving, but there definitely is a class of lightweight contenders who are going to be in the main event, in the spotlight, come 2025. Well, that is it for this week's episode. We are available every Tuesday on your favorite podcast platforms, and in between, you can find us on social media. I'm on Twitter, or X, at Fighting Words 2, and the show is United Boxing Pod. Darren, how can people find you?
You can get me at Darren Rees _ in all the usual places. And if you're on Blue Sky, it's just at Darren Rees. And can I just say, I'm getting close to deleting Twitter or X. It is becoming a miserable place to be. So I might not be on there soon, but that's a story for another day.
Well, we'll hear that story another day, and we'll see you next week when we talk about Tyson Fury versus Alexander Usyk 2 and everything else on that undercard. Darren, it's been a pleasure as always.